So just there is a network problem. Just we are checking the stream. Once the stream is on, then we will connect again. Okay, so I'll show one more video how they are checking the sugar with reflectometer. So we have studied during the still wine production chaptalization. So chaptalization is the process of adding sugar into the must to increase the alcohol percentage. So the manufacturers have to check the sugar content in the must, the unfermented grape juice. So just I will show you a video. Just see this video, how they are.
Homebrewers use it,
So
pro
this is the
brewers use it.
reflectometer.
You should use it too. This tool is called a refractometer. It measures the specific gravity of wort by determining how the liquid affects the bending of light through a prism. Due to a small viewing area, the sample amount required is much less than the amount used with the standard hydrometer, which relies on buoyancy to determine gravity. When the sample is placed on the viewing area and allowed to cool briefly, the plate is put in place. When you look through the viewfinder, you see a line marking the split between a white area and a blue area. This line denotes the gravity of the wort. Some models read in a scale called Plato, with units of bricks. Others read in bricks on one side and an estimated reading in specific gravity on the other side. For example, in this sample, the current gravity is approximately 10 bricks. In this sample, the current gravity is just a bit over 3 bricks, estimated at 1.013 or 1013 specific gravity. With refractometers, the temperature correction will work up to about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. If your sample is hotter than this, either be aware that the reading may be slightly off or allow the sample to cool first. Refractometers are handy brewing tools for extract brewers, but they are essential equipment for partial mash, brew in a bag, and especially all grain brewers, because they allow you to track the changing gravity of your mash and wort during the steep and sparge, as well as give you pre-boil and post-boil gravity readings. Your new refractometer is ready to go straight out of the box. The factory calibrates it before it's sent to Northern Brewer, so there's no need to adjust it. But if you ever have questions about calibration, see the instructions included inside the case. One very important note: the refractometer is not reading gravity necessarily. It is reading how the light bends through the solution. So once fermentation begins, the reading is distorted by alcohol. That is to say, you cannot use a refractometer alone for determining the gravity of a beer, wine, or mead once it has begun fermenting. The Northern Brewer website has a refractometer calculator to help you adjust for your final gravity. Go to northernbrewer.com/refractometer-calculator. Enter your original bricks reading, then enter the bricks reading during or after fermentation, and voila! You have the converted specific gravity. A refractometer is one of many tools to help you brew better beer, available now at northernbrewer.com.
So this is how the manufacturer will check the wine, the sugar content which is present in the must. So they will calculate accordingly. Then they will add the alcohol percentage. If the wine doesn't have proper required sugar content, so they will add the extra sugar. This process is called chaptalization, one of the very important process. So let me show you another video.
Wine,
You can see here
treasured by the Greeks
harvesting,
and exported throughout the Roman
how
Empire.
mechanical harvesting happens.
The wine trade dots the
How
landscape of the ancient world.
wine produced in a different way.
Throughout history,
Because
the art of the grape has
small
been celebrated,
changes. Every country produces on
and its development mirrors the development of commerce and civilization. Over the centuries, the industry has expanded and innovation has set new standards for production. But even today, the art of wine, its essence, lies in the process. The journey from vine to wine. Wine. It can hold different meanings for each of us. For some, it's a simple beverage to be enjoyed at mealtime. For others, it's a commodity, something sought after and collected. Yet for many, wine remains intimidating. And it doesn't have to be. After all, it's only fermented grape juice. Hi, I'm Michael Fagan. In this episode, we're going to travel to some of the finest wine regions of the world, where we'll meet the winemakers and discover the secrets of winemaking and the magic of the grape. Although we are all familiar with various grapes from the fruit stand, the species of grape which is proven best for the production of wine is called Vitis vinifera, which means literally the wine grape. Whether Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, or Pinot Noir, virtually all wine grapes used today stem from Vitis vinifera, called the noble grape. Most wine grapes are grown in two belts around the globe, between 30 and 50 degrees latitude, north and south. These regions have the temperate climate and moderate rainfall the grapes need to flourish. The cycle also includes a beneficial winter season because grapevines need a time to rest between crops. Now, it's not just a matter of geography. Selection of a proper site and the skill of the growers and winemakers will determine the character of the finished wine.
There is an innate factor, which is the terroir, which is the location. You name it. And the place where you grow vines. And then there are acquired factors which are at least as important. And the work of people who have just developed viticulture in that first identified the place as potentially extremely rewarding and then worked on it in order to produce wine.
Traditionally, grapes were grown in tracts of land that were left over when better soils were used to farm grain and vegetable produce. Today, many of the world's grape growers believe that poor soil produces their best fruit.
You have to find unhospitable, very low in nutrients type of soil. The roots, which will actually drive the roots to go very, very deep. That's where quality starts.
So the roots have really to go down and as down as possible to get the real sap, the minerals. And in fact, they have to fight together.
So the best plots are right in the middle.
Obviously, soil conditions will vary widely across the world, but there can be dramatic differences, even in the same vineyard. I found it very surprising on my first visit, the difference in terroir, the difference in soil from one property to another. It's not a wide range in between. You can sort of step over and you're in a whole new area.
Absolutely, I can show you here. We are at Vieux-Château-Serton. Next door is Petrus. Taste the wines together, they are completely different.
The differences in soil, the climate, and even the microclimate around the vine will influence the character of the wine produced.
The character of a wine is starts with the place that it's grown, and Different soil types and microclimates produce different qualities, some better than others and some more interesting than others. And you're always trying to highlight the best potential qualities that a given site or soil can give you.
To make it hardier against disease and pests, and to adapt it to different soil conditions around the world, the Vitis vinifera vine is often grafted with hardier North American rootstock. The grafting consists of actually cutting the shoot of each varietal and binding them together to form a new living plant. The resulting vine will then possess the qualities of the noble grape, Vitis vinifera, along with the desirable properties of the hardier rootstock. It's really quite a sturdy and hardy plant, isn't it?
Oh, it's very much so. Very, very much so. It'll tolerate many different soil conditions, many different climatic conditions, hillsides, valleys. It's a very tough, tough plant.
Once a new vineyard site has been selected and cleared, the grafted vines are planted. This comes after careful analysis of the many growing conditions, all of which are included in the French word terroir.
Terroir means not only the ground in which the grapes are grown, but also the atmosphere, the aspect, the weather around, and the drainage. It takes into account all kinds of aspects about how that grape was grown.
So this is Merlot?
Yes.
In grape growing, there are no overnight miracles. Rarely is there a usable harvest before the third year's crop, and growers will wait decades for the vine to yield its highest quality fruit.
Well, there's a saying in winedom that says that the older the vine, the better the wine. And when they're healthy, that's absolutely true. Older vineyards care for their fruit differently than, say, teenage vines, in that they will shift their energy away from creating vegetation to looking after the fruit at a slightly earlier time. And then they don't race to maturity. And so that's something that we find gives better flavor, more complexity, and more density.
And it's basically comes down to the longer a vine is in the ground, the more extensive a root system it can develop. And what happens is the deeper and more extensive that root system is, the more access the vine has to other things in the soil.
Spring marks the beginning of a new year in the vineyard. Here, in France's Alsace region, the beginning of the growing season is celebrated with the procession of Saint-Urbain, the patron saint of the growers. The work in the vineyards actually began months earlier. First, the vines were pruned to remove unnecessary canes. This results in fewer but larger bunches of ripe grapes and controls the shape of the vine. Next, the shoots are tied to the appropriate wires on the trellis structure that support the vine. Although the grape is a creeping or climbing vine and can grow wild, it must be trained to the trellis structure to produce optimal fruit for the winemaker. In late spring, the growth cycle begins with flowering. Most grapevines are self-pollinating, containing both male and female parts. At this point in the season, the grower can begin to predict how much a vineyard will yield at harvest. As the season progresses, grape growers will continue to monitor the health and development of the fruit. The grower's objective is to improve the yield and overall quality of the fruit by maintaining good ventilation within the vine and managing the fruit's exposure to the sun. In drier climates, grape growers depend on irrigation for the survival of their vines. This control over water supply can have a distinct advantage, allowing them to regulate the moisture a plant receives and making them less vulnerable to erratic weather conditions.
If you irrigate, you're not battling what Mother Nature is throwing at you all the time, so you're putting on very exacting amounts of water, which really help you to dial in your wine styles, your grape styles out in the vineyard.
Often, the spraying of fungicides, herbicides, and pesticides are necessary to control disease and pests. Their use, however, must be discontinued well before the harvest. So this is the Bonterra vineyard? There is an alternative, however, used in virtually all parts of the wine world. Some growers employ organic viticultural practices to combat pests and disease.
Well, what organic means in the production of wine, making wine, is that in our grape growing, we're not using any synthetic chemicals, no pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. The whole approach is prevention. So in the case of an insect population, we plant things between the grapes, daikon radish, bell beans, oats, all kinds of things that provide nectar, that attract predatory insects, and that keeps our insect populations down. It's moving.
Insect pests are also controlled in other ways.
You need to put some lights out.
Here, pheromones are placed in the vineyard to disrupt insect pest reproduction and protect the vine. Throughout the entire growing season, a process called canopy management is employed. The vines need to be constantly trimmed to reduce excess vegetation. This hedging directs all the vine's energy to where it'll do the most good, into the grapes. Also, leaves that have grown up around the grape bunches may be removed to allow more sunshine onto the fruit for better ripening. At various stages of growth, immature grape clusters will also be removed to direct more nutrients to the remaining bunches. This is
Okay, we'll see more these kind of videos in upcoming classes. Before we close for the today, I want to show the very important videos of what we have studied about in the previous classes, sherry and port. Because anyway, we are going to study about the old world wines and new world wines. Then we'll study. I will show some of the best videos of Bordeaux, the wine making of Bordeaux and wine making of Burgundy, and you can study more elaborately, and you can understand how the wines, what is the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy and other countries. Everything we'll see the videos later on once I teach you about the wines of France and wines of Italy and everything. So now I will show the video of sherry, because we already completed sherry, so you can easily connect.
While Andalusia is known for its olive oil and Iberico ham, it also produces sherry, a fortified wine made near the town of Jerez. Sherry has a protected designation of origin, and all wine labeled as sherry must come from the Sherry Triangle, an area between Jerez de la Frontera, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and El Puerto de Santa Maria.
Sherry has been traditionally regarded as a good, very good aperitif wine, or a dessert wine if we talk about the sweet styles of sherry. But we are convinced, and this is the way we treat sherry here at home, that this is a great wine to accompany food. And this is, as I said, this is the way we enjoy sherry here in Jerez. So what we're doing is trying to pass the message that sherry, because of the enormous variety of styles and the versatility and the power and that capacity that the sherry has to enhance the taste, the flavors of food, is a great companion for. So every second year we have a competition here which would join restaurants, chefs and sommeliers from 7 different countries. In each of those countries, we also run this national competition. Basically, the whole idea behind tapas is going from one flavor to the other, going from a langostino down to some chorizo, some manchego cheese, some Iberian ham. When we drink fino with it, what we're doing, we're cleaning our palate in every sip. So you appreciate every step in your tapas menu thoroughly without mixing flavors in your palate.
Cesar Saldaña, Director General of the regulatory board that governs all sherry production, explains the unique way that sherry is produced.
Sherry is basically the result of a long history, a long tradition. We've been making wines for 3,000 years. And it's also the result of a very precise natural conditions. It all starts with a very peculiar soil that we call the albariza, which is capable to absorb the rainfall that we get in just a few days during the year, and 3 white grape varieties. Palomino grape variety is the most important one, and then we have 2 other grape varieties, Pedro Jimenez and Moscatel, that we use for the sweet styles of sherry. At the beginning, what we do is making a white wine. But there is a very special natural phenomenon in this area. The white wines will develop a kind of cream in the surface, a kind of a layer of yeasts, which is what we call floor. And that floor will confer very special organoleptic characteristics to that wine. It'll be the decision of the winemaker either to keep the floor or taking the floor out to open the possibilities of different sherry styles. If we manage to keep the floor, we will have what we call the finos and the manzanillas. These are extremely light wines, very pale in color, very pungent, beautiful aperitif wines, beautiful also for the seafood, very refreshing, but very dry. If we increase the alcoholic strength of the wine and therefore we get rid of the floor, the wine loses that layer that is protecting it from direct contact with the oxygen, and it gets much darker in color, kind of amber color, mahogany color if very aged. This is how we produce what we call the amontillados and the olorosos. These are much stronger, deeper wines with very deep aromas, in which wood will gain a very prominent role.
The old wines, amontillados and olorosos, are concentrated wines. Most of the time, very old wines, small quantities, and to be consumed in small quantities, and not on the same sit. You can keep a bottle a few weeks, including 1 year, to consume, because the wine remains in good conditions.
Sherry can be divided roughly into 3 different styles. First, there are the pale, dry finos and manzanillas. These are the wines most Andalusians will enjoy with their tapas, and they are excellent with simple, straightforward dishes of olives or almonds, Iberico or Serrano hams, or well-aged cheeses. Then there are the more intense flavors that come with darker-hued and darker-flavored amontillados and olorosos, and are considered optimum with meats, especially wild game and grilled red meats. Finally, there are the sweet sherries, made by blending sweet Pedro Jimenez with the oloroso to create cream sherries that are terrific with soft, ripe cheeses, especially blue cheeses, and of course with foie gras.
All the different styles of sherry that we produce, either the very fine, pungent finos or the very bold, very structured olorosos, they are also aged through a very special type of aging process that we call the solera method. The solera is basically a system in which we are taking the wine to different scales of maturation, blending the wines with the other vintages, with wines with different degrees of maturation, to have a consistent quality at the end of the process, maybe after 5, 10, 15 years. It depends on the type of sherry. This is how we produce the dry sherries. But then those dry sherries can also be blended with the sweet wines that we produce out of the Pedro Jimenez and the Moscatel grape varieties. So when we speak about the Solera system, we're talking about different scales of maturation in the aging of our wines. Here in the lower row of casks is where we have the older wines. This row, we call them the Solera, and this is coming from the word suelo, meaning floor, right? So this is where the wines that have matured for longer are always kept. Here we have what we call the first criadera, then the second criadera. We can have different scales of maturation, all right? Now, when we need to bottle some sherry, we will always take that wine from the lower casks, so from those casks in the Solera. And we only take a small fraction out of each barrel, the same quantity from each of the barrels in the Solera row, right? This is what we bottle. Of course, we have to filter and then we bottle it. So now the quantity that we have taken out from each of the barrels in the Solera will be replaced by this wine, which is a little younger, right? The one in the first criadera casks, right? So we transferred that same quantity into the next scale of maturation. We continue doing the same from the second criadera into the first. And we can have as many criaderas as you wish. I mean, there are some systems here in Jerez with maybe 12, 15 criaderas. Obviously, we don't place them one on top of the other. We have them in different places. But the important thing is that we have always those scales of maturation perfectly identified, and that the young wines will continue always the same path. Because it's in the youngest of all the criaderas that we will give entrance to the wines from the last harvest. The young wine will enter the youngest criadera, will be blended already with wines that have been sitting there for years. Then that blend will be reblended in the next stage, and then reblended until they reach the Solera casks.
One sherry wine that's gained a lot of attention among chefs and sommeliers recently is Manzanilla, a type of pale, dry fino sherry that is only made in the small town of Sanlúcar de Barrameda, at the edge of the sea where the great Guadalquivir River empties into the Atlantic Ocean.
Now, the way Manzanilla is made, we get the young wine from the Palomino grape in our vineyards that's pressed. We get the free-run juice, and we only use free-run juice for Manzanilla. That young wine is totally dry. The fermentation is complete. When I discovered Manzanilla, which was many years ago, I discovered it in its right context when I came here to Spain, and above all to Andalusia. The tapas culture is very much an Andalusian eating concept, the quintessential tapas wine has always been Manzanilla.
Sherry is a great wine for food because, as I said, when you drink, when you sip a little bit of Manzanilla or Fino, I mean, your taste buds are alerted immediately. Sherry is a great taste enhancer because in every sip you're getting your palate excited, so you appreciate every step in your tapas menu thoroughly without mixing flavors in your palate.
Okay, before we close for the day, just we'll see one more video, how the port is being produced. Then you will easily, you can understand, you can connect with what we have discussed and what you have learned. You can connect with that video. So that's the last video of the day. Just it is a small clipping of how port. Then the rest of the videos we'll see once we finish the wines of France, wines of Italy. We are going to study about all the world wine countries, and also we are going to study about the new world wine countries. So we will see this port wine, then we'll push off from tomorrow onwards. We will start with the world wines.
In the world of wine, there's an ancient tradition for opening a bottle so old, the cork has become too fragile to be easily removed. Heated tongs are applied to the neck, followed by ice or a damp cloth, and voila! Called tonging, this custom is most closely linked to one kind of wine, port. Fortified with brandy, it's sweet, strong, and savory, with an incredible ability to age.
Some wines are ready to drink as soon as you buy them. Others are better after 3 or 5 years of aging. And then there's another wine that tradition has one generation buying it for the next. At least that's what I was told when I first started to learn about wine. I'm Michael Fagan. In this episode, we're going to discover one of the world's most famous wines, port.
port, like many wines and spirits, is named for the city from which it is shipped. Oporto, or Porto as the locals call it, is both beautiful and ancient, with a history intrinsically linked to its most famous product. Today it is the second largest city in Portugal, playing a major role in the country's economy. The port shippers' warehouses, or lodges, reside to this day on the south side of the Douro River, called Vila Nova de Gaia. Many of these companies date back to the 17th century and are named for their British founders. The port trade is an industry that covets its traditions, and nowhere is it more evident than in this building, Factory House. Membership here is so exclusive, it's only extended to principals in the port trade who are of British descent. Rupert Symington, whose family's been in the port business for 4 generations, invited us to the club's private weekly meeting, the Wednesday lunch.
The British merchants about 200-300 years ago set up as trade associations around the world, and they were called factories. And this, I think, is the last surviving example of a factory house anywhere in the world. I am one of about 25 members. There's a tradition: each member puts up 10 to 15 cases of the house's most recent wine. So we do have a pretty good library of wines going back probably over 100 years. Those wines do get served up very occasionally at dinners.
Tell me a little bit about the Wednesday lunch. What happens at the luncheon?
Wednesday lunch really is members of the trade bring their colleagues from other firms, customers, the odd journalist. And then at the end of lunch, we have a charming ceremony where we actually guess the vintage port. The treasurer selects a vintage port and then puts it on the table without telling anybody what it is, and then we all have to guess what it is, which is, tremendous fun, as you can imagine.
After all these years, the factory house still represents the British influence on the port industry today. But where did it all begin?
One of the oldest port houses is Taylor, Fladgate and Yeatman, known simply as Taylor's. Established in 1692, Taylor's is run today by descendants of the Yeatman and Fladgate families, one of whom is Hewish Bauer, the company's unofficial historian.
Before the middle of the 17th century, the British used to drink large quantities of wine from the old kingdom of Aquitaine, therefore Bordeaux, Bergerac, etc., in the southwest corner of France. And then Britain and France had one of the endless misunderstandings, and therefore the French forbade all trade between mainland Europe and the British Isles. So suddenly there was the most appalling thirst in the British Isles. And luckily for us, for instance, our founder had been sailing down here. He was in the wool business, so he actually knew that wine was being produced down here. Initially, the wine that these British entrepreneurs took back to England with them was a not very strong, still, dry table wine.
The trouble was there that the wine had an extra day on the ocean before it got back to Britain, and it didn't travel too well, so they had the idea of adding brandy. So a lot of the world's famous fortified wines like sherry, port, Madeira all originated that way. And I think the British acquired a taste for this rather strong, rich wine from Portugal, and the merchants started to actually settle in Oporto and build these warehouses.
While British wine merchants have dominated the port business from its inception, there are many Portuguese companies that also have long, rich histories.
The city of Porto is actually where the story of port ends. To find out where it begins, we have to move further east up the Douro River. That's where the grapes are grown.
And the easiest way to get there is by train. The Douro Valley is the oldest demarcated wine region in the world. In 1757, the Marquis of Pombal laid out the boundaries of the port wine region with granite pillars. But the Douro's history goes back much farther than that. The Romans, whose ancient structures can still be found in vineyards throughout the valley, first planted grapes here over 2,000 years ago. Today, the region's inhospitable conditions are masked by a lush growth of almonds, olives, and grapes, and it's hard to believe that even they grow here. Vineyards in the Douro are called quintas, and our first stop was Bom Retiro. This quinta is owned by Ramos Pinto, a company founded in 1890 by Adriano Ramos Pinto. We spoke with his great-grandson, João Nicolau de Almeida, about the formidable task of growing grapes in the Douro.
All these mountains, it's a rock. And then we have to break this rock and make soil. And then only on the 5th year we can make port. So we have to wait that the roots goes to the mother rock again. And fortunately, the leaves of the schist are in horizontal sense, and the roots get in the fissures of the schists and go very deep. That's why the vineyard can resist of all these very complicated conditions, because there is in the leaves of the schists a regular supply of water for the vineyard.
This is Miquel Roquet. 4 generations of his family have owned and run Quinta de Crasto, a quinta with roots reaching as far back as 1615. Miquel also knows a thing or two about the Douro.
So you have the vertical plantings here, which works fine here because it's very steep, but you don't lose a lot of land. While in some places where it's really, really steep, the only way for you to grow the wine is basically with terraces. It's surprising how they did that about 250 years ago, because you see a lot of pre-phylloxera walls everywhere, and that's the way they were growing wine 200 years ago. And at the time there was no machinery, so everything has to be done handmade. Usually you have many different grape varieties and so on. The new terraces, we tend to plant it by grape variety.
There are over 80 native grape varieties in the Douro, but since 1981, 6 varieties have been chosen as the best for port wine.
The best one is Touriga Nacional, is our noble variety. Touriga Nacional is this vineyard, this leaf. Touriga Nacional produce very low quantity.
Early September. After a long, bumpy ride deep into the Douro, we arrived at Ramos Pinto's Quinta de Erva Mora, just in time for the first harvest of the season. This quinta is like an oasis of green surrounded by mountains of rock.
Welcome to the Douro. It's hilly, it's hot, and yet they still manage to grow some of the finest grapes in the world. The steepness of the vineyards makes mechanization impossible, so all the work must be done by hand. And it's hard work under a scorching sun. It was 45 degrees Celsius that day. Many producers told us how increasingly difficult it is to get people to do the work.
Like anywhere else, people don't want to work the traditional, agriculture. They don't want to necessarily live in places where they don't have color TV or, cinemas. And it's harder and harder to find people to work the agricultural side of the port trade.
And the work doesn't stop here. The grapes still have to be crushed. In Portugal, just like in ancient Rome, grapes are still crushed by feet in stone vats called lagars.
Some people think it's folklore or something for the tourists, but in fact it's still the best way to extract the maximum quality from the skin without spoiling the skin.
Treading starts at sundown and continues well past midnight. It's like a military march. And as you can see, they'll let just about anybody do it, as long as you wash your feet. Usually, after a few hours of marching, music is brought in and the dancing begins. But not in Arlagar. They tell me it's good for your skin, though. Unfortunately, there are just not enough people to crush all port wine grapes by foot. Another technique is auto-vinification. Here, the carbon dioxide released naturally during fermentation is used to crush the grapes, somewhat like a percolator. A third method that uses robotic feet to simulate foot treading has just recently been developed as well.
Basically, the wines are tread until fermentation starts, the natural process of fermentation. So there's no artificial yeast, it's just a 100% natural process. So basically, with the release of alcohol, the baume, what you call, I think, bricks, will come down. So the more alcohol is released, the lower will be the baume. And it comes a time that you will stop the fermentation. And the way to do that, basically, is to add fortified brandy, which is 77% alcohol brandy. And right there, when you add the brandy to the must, or to the port juice, or the grape juice, basically the fermentation will stop because all the bacteria, everything will die.
The wine is then stored at the Quinta until the following spring when it's shipped to Porto. For hundreds of years, they used boats called barcos robelos to float the wine down the Douro. This was a dangerous journey that saw both precious cargo and lives lost to the river. Nowadays, it's done by tanker truck. Not as romantic, but much safer.
It's 120 kilometers up the Douro River where port is born. But it's across the river from Oporto and Villanova de Gaia where it actually takes its first steps.
The winemaker must now decide on the style of port for the new wine. And there are plenty of options. The essential difference between all port styles is the vessel in which it is aged, either casks or bottles, and the length of time it spends there. Let's start with Ruby Port. Sandeman, founded in 1790 by George Sandeman, is famous the world over for port and sherry. João Graça told us all about Ruby Port.
We age it in big vats like that one because the big vats avoid the oxidation. They have from 20 to 80,000 liters. And the wine keeps the young characteristics, the fresh fruit aromas.
White port is made essentially the same as Ruby Port, except it uses white grapes. It's the only style of port that does.
We produce white ports predominantly in my...
Okay, so these are the videos. You can easily now you could have understand. Now you could have connect with what we have studied in the last few classes. So next class we will study about wines of old world wines, old world countries, and we'll start with France and we'll go to Italy. We'll study about Germany, and of course we have already studied about Spain and Portugal. Then we'll move to old world wine countries. So then we will study about food and wine pairing and storage levels and alcohol levels, everything we'll study. So today we have seen a lot of videos around. We have seen 4 or 5 videos. So now you can connect with studies what we have studied and with along with the video. And if you have any doubts, please message me doubts. So tomorrow class we'll discuss and we'll try to clarify those doubts. And apart from that, I wanted to show one more video, that champagne production method, because it was very unique method and it's method traditional. So maybe tomorrow before we start the class, I will show 15 to 20 minutes video of how champagne has been produced. Then we will continue our classes. So until then, bye guys. Take care, stay safe, and we will be in touch. Stay connected. Bye. Thank you guys.